What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network on this wonderful evening. For those of you that just watched the Thursday night game, I won't spoil it for you. It was fantastic. It was what we were hoping for. Very few injuries. Maybe I will spoil it for you. Duke Johnson did get hurt, and he looked terrible. So that was a miss on my part, but we didn't call to start him at least. And it looks like David Johnson might actually have something left in him, although we'll get to that later. Tyreek Hill, decent game, not targeted too much. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, absolute dominant performance. Everything that we were hoping for. We'll recap this more later. We want to talk about the rest of these Sunday games. We want to look at each of the early games on the slate. We will look at the later games tomorrow, and we'll talk about these one by one. Talk about the Vegas over-under, talk about who we're starting, who we're sitting in them, and talk about our prediction for the game. So we'll go each of these piece by piece, and we'll begin with the Jets versus the Bills, this game in Buffalo. And pretty low over-under in this one, 39 implied total points for this one. Bills, 23, Jets, 16. So Vegas is expecting this one to be a low-score game, and I'm pretty sure Vegas is pretty accurate on this one. Obviously, the Jets, one of the worst offenses in the league last year, and the Bills, pretty well played when going against, poor opponents and average versus decent opponents. Last year, the Jets were pretty average on defense overall. I mean, they were pretty good at stopping the tight ends, but running backs, they were number 20, wide receivers 19, quarterbacks right in the middle at 16, and losing Jamal Adams, losing CJ Mosley, probably going to take a little step back in the defensive department, but still expecting them to be, okay on defense and pretty slow offense, not really forcing the other team to have to score too many points. And then the Bills, tremendous defense last year, at least through the air, average against the run, but really good against the quarterbacks, receivers, and tight end group. So this should be a defensive battle for sure. Expecting it kind of go how Vegas implies. So in terms of who we're looking at in this one, I think you're okay. This is the stretch of games where you're going to want to start Josh Allen. You drafted him. You want to start him. I get it. This is probably going to be, the first half of the season is going to be where he's going to get the majority of his fantasy points before that schedule turns difficult. And with that, I am comfortable starting Stefon Diggs in this one. Likely, if you drafted Stefon Diggs, you're going to go through the same conundrum every week that you never really can bench him because you never know when he's going to blow up. But especially in a matchup like this, I'm comfortable starting Stefon Diggs. In the Bills defense, arguably the best defense on the week, playing against Sam Darnold and an offense that we're not expecting to do too much. In terms of players that I would try to avoid this week, although it's not a requirement, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. The situation in camp right now is looking like these guys are going to be pretty close to a 50-50 split. It might be a hot hand approach. It might be Singletary gets to work to start the game and Moss grinds it out towards the end. Since we're not expecting a lot of points being scored in this game, I'm not sure that we can really trust either of them. One of them will probably end up having a decent game, but at this point, it's kind of a toss-up for me to really say who it's going to be. So unless you're in a situation where you have to start one of them, I'd kind of like to play the waiting game and see how the situation works itself out, especially if you have both. And then in terms of, other receivers on this team, you can start John Brown, but I'm not expecting there to be a lot of points scored. So I'm probably only comfortable starting Diggs, and I would leave John Brown on my bench to see what type of a target split there actually is. I mean, I would not be surprised if Stefon Diggs and John Brown end up finishing pretty close to each other in terms of fantasy points scored this year. But this week, I would prefer Stefon Diggs. And then I'm not going to start Cole Beasley, and I'm definitely not starting Dawson Knox. We'll have to see if he can take a step forward at all this year, but against the Jets, who had a pretty good defense against tight ends last year, we'll leave that one on the table. All right, looking at the Jets, pretty much the only guys I am comfortable starting in this game are Le'Veon Bell and Jamison Crowder. Both of those guys should get a lot of targets, and even in a game where we expect the Bills to win, pretty handedly, I do think that there's going to be enough targets to go around to feed Bell and Crowder in this one. Crowder against the Bills last year in week 1 had 17 targets. He's not going to get a lot of yards, but he'll get plenty of work in PPR leagues. Now, Chris Herndon is an interesting situation. I am okay starting him if you do not have a better option. But if you have a better option, like you've drafted someone earlier in the draft, like a Tyler Higbee, a Hayden Hurst, I would much rather have a safer option like that this week. I do think Herndon could get a decent amount of targets considering that Perriman and Mims are hurt, but Herndon's also dealing with an injury of his own. And the Bills were really, really good at locking down the tight end last year. Their defense is pretty solid, and they didn't really lose a lot of key pieces. So probably would pivot off of Herndon this week, but keep him on your bench. Better days are coming for him. And probably not going to start the Jets defense really much at any point this year, but definitely not this week. And I would not be looking to throw out either Perriman or Mims or Darnold this week going against the Bills defense. Not a good idea. And then Frank Gore, we'll see what the usage splits are. But going against a really tough defense, I think Bell is the only running back you could start here because of his pass catching upside. I don't really think that Frank Gore is going to be involved in the passing game and probably not going to be someone that you want to start in a game that you would be looking at in terms of, low rushing volume. All right. So in terms of our prediction for this one, right now we are looking at the Bills winning this one pretty handedly. I had the Bills winning 23-14. So I think this is hitting the under for this one, but I do have the Bills covering. So pretty expecting the Jets to not really show up too much for this one. All right. So for those of you that are watching the stream live, I will answer your questions in between the videos because I'm actually going to chop this up and put these into individual videos. But for those of you who are asking questions, I'll reach out to you at this time. So starting Herndon over Hurst, I would not do that. So the Seahawks were one of the worst teams in the NFL last year against the tight end, and I'm expecting that to be a pretty high volume passing game that should be a shootout there versus Atlanta and Seattle. So I would start Hurst this week pretty confidently. I would definitely start Hurst over Herndon, and then start Taylor or Akers at the flex, opt for Carry-On. Okay, that is an interesting call. So Taylor is in a really good matchup, and Akers is in an okay matchup. The issue with Akers is we really don't know. Well, I guess this is the same issue for both of them. Really don't know how they want to deploy those rookies in week one. I would be more inclined to probably start Jonathan Taylor for the upside, but they're ranked pretty much right next to each other. It's kind of a coin flip. If you need a better shot at like a massive week, I would probably take Jonathan Taylor. If you just need someone to put up like 10, 12 points, I think Akers probably gives you that better shot. And then last question, Hawkinson or Hurst? I would go Hurst. Again, same reasons. I think Hurst is going to have a smash week against Seattle. Seattle was one of the teams that Tyler Higbee destroyed last year, and I think it's going to happen again. Seattle didn't really do too much to improve their defense against tight ends. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm expecting that to be a high pass volume game. All right. Let's take a look at the Vikings and the Packers. Packers going to Minnesota in week one for this one. Should be a pretty interesting game in the Battle of the North. These are the two teams that most people are expecting to be the division front runners, although the Lions could end up being a pretty, deep contender for this division. So looking at this game, another low over under 45, and right now the Vikings are actually projected to win by 2.5 points. It's given us an implied point total of around 24-21. So again, decently low score game. Now last year, the Packers were really good at stopping the quarterback, and they were pretty good against preventing running backs and wide receivers from the scoring fantasy points. Now, their linebacker core got a little shaken up, and they didn't really do too much to improve their defense. Otherwise, we'll see how this turns out for them. And the Vikings lost a lot of pieces on defense. They did get Ngakoue, so that will help them, but Danielle Hunter is not going to be healthy for this one. So I'm not really too concerned about the Vikings defense numbers from last year because this is a really different defensive group. And overall, I am kind of playing the let's play against the Vikings until they prove to us that they have a pretty good defense. It's pretty young, inexperienced, and I would expect the Vikings to have a little bit of growing pains in their defense. So I'm going to exploit that. So I think this will actually be a little bit higher scoring than Vegas thinks. That being said, these are two of the most clear-cut teams in terms of who you can comfortably start week in and week out. Obviously, you're starting Devontae Adams. You're starting Aaron Jones. There's no question there. If you drafted these guys early on, last year, Aaron Jones absolutely torched the Vikings in both weeks that he played against them, and Devontae Adams did the same thing. Their history against the Vikings is very solid, and again, this is a defense that we're expecting to regress a little bit. There's really no reason to talk yourself out of starting either of these guys. They're both both top 5 options this week. Maybe Aaron Jones top 10, but pretty close to top 5. I'm not really that comfortable, though, starting Aaron Rodgers in this one, especially if Aaron Jones ends up getting 2 scores, what we've seen against the Vikings. And Aaron Rodgers was very hard to trust unless he played against a very bad defense last year. He was not a good fantasy quarterback. And if they're going to continue that high run offense like we've seen for the past entire year with Matt LaFleur there, I'm going to be a little bit hesitant to start Aaron Rodgers this week unless I absolutely have to. He could go off. He does have a pretty good history against the Vikings, but if it's anything like Week 16 last year, you're going to be disappointed if you start Rodgers. Allen Lazard, I'm going to play wait and see. I don't know whether it's going to be him or MVS that's the second wide receiver here, and there may just not be a second wide receiver that you ever want to start in Green Bay. Devontae Adams could possibly get like 200 targets this year and just be the only guy in town. And then I'm probably going to be a little bit tepid about starting either defense in this game. You can if you need to, but division games and ones that I think we're going to hit the over, probably going to try to avoid that situation. And then we're not going to get cute. We're not going to play Jamal Williams or AJ Dillon here. Aaron Jones is still the guy until they prove to us otherwise. I think they'll definitely get some work, but no way that we can predict who's going to actually end up getting the majority of the touches there. So I'm going to stick with Aaron Jones and no one else. Not going to touch any of the pass catcher there. On the Vikings side, assuming Dalvin Cook isn't going to pull Le'Veon Bell and not show up on Sunday, Dalvin Cook is an absolute smash start this week. Absolutely dominant against the Packers last year in week 1 or week 2. Adam Thielen as well should end up getting a ton of targets in this game, and I think he'll be able to rise above that good Packers secondary. Same thing, we're not going to start the Vikings defense if we can avoid it, because I think this game will have a decent amount of scoring, and we're really not going to play pat of cakes with anyone else on this Vikings team. Alexander Mattison is pretty much a handcuff if Cook goes down. I'm not going to play Olabisi Johnson or Justin Jefferson. I'm not expecting this to be a high-volume pass game for them. And between Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph, we need to see how this situation plays it out. I really like Irv Smith, but as long as Kyle Rudolph is there, I'm probably going to wait and see and figure out how they want to utilize those two guys and see if Irv Smith actually gets put into the slot a bit more. So we'll play a wait-and-see game on there. But obviously, you're going to start your studs in this one and probably avoid everyone else. In terms of my prediction, I think the Packers actually win this one. Packers have done a pretty good job at taking down the Vikings in recent history, and I think their defense is a little bit worse. So overall, I'm going to give the nod to the Packers in this one. They take down the Vikings 27-21, slightly above the over. All right, poor Bears. No chance given for them still getting Monty at 102. Well, that is definitely an interesting call there. With David Montgomery coming back, looks like he could actually be fully healthy, which is surprising considering how scary it looked like that injury was in training camp. He's going to be a really interesting play this week. We'll get to that game in this video as well. So I'll talk about that more there. But I mean, he's a pretty cheap option overall, but I will probably avoid him at least this week just to make sure that he's fully healthy and going to get a full workload. Okay, let's take a look at the Eagles and the Washington football team. Now, last year, we saw these two teams play each other in week 1, and it ended up being a pretty good game for fantasy. This was the breakout game for Terry McLaurin and the game that Deshaun Jackson showed us what we were hoping to see from him, and unfortunately, it was the only week that we saw that from him, right? So, actually a decent low over-under in this one. They're projecting this to be a 42.5 point game with the Eagles winning by 6. So that's giving us an implied point total of about 24-18. Eagles winning this one. Now, last year, the Eagles were pretty good at stopping the run, and that's kind of been their MO for a while. Also pretty good against the tight end, but they were pretty bad, especially towards the end of the year against the receivers. Now, obviously, adding Darius Slay should hopefully help their secondary a little bit, but I'm not expecting them to be lights out against the pass by any means. And the Washington football team were pretty atrocious against the run last year, pretty average across the board elsewhere. So I don't know why this one is such a low over-under. We've seen these teams go head-to-head a lot, and they typically tend to be pretty competitive games. We saw that in week 1 last year, and then also, I believe it was week 16 that they played. It was pretty close, and there was a lot of scoring going back and forth. Obviously, adding Chase Young might end up, giving Carson Wentz and the run game there in Philadelphia a little bit of a scare, but we'll see how it turns out. We're not really sure exactly how all of these rookies are going to fit in right away. I'm not expecting everyone to have a Clyde Edwards-Helaire type breakout in week 1. So What does that mean in terms of who we're starting? We'll look at the Eagles. I'm starting pretty much everyone that you drafted with the intention of starting. Carson Wentz, I think, is a smash play this week. Should be a pretty high-scoring game. I like the over in this one. Miles Sanders, obviously you took him either in the first or second round. There's concern that maybe he's going to be put on like a pitch count or they'll use him in a limited workload, but pay attention to the words here. They said possibly, potentially. It's not a guarantee. And at this point, last year, Miles Sanders put up a 30-point PPR game against the Washington football team. And even if he gets limited touches, he still could produce. On those, you probably don't have a better option. And I still think Miles Sanders is going to be good to go. To me, that sounds like coach speak. It sounds like a smoke screen, but maybe that's just my blinders coming on because I love Sanders so much. But I'm definitely starting Sanders pretty confidently this week. Deshaun Jackson, if you drafted him, your expectation was to be able to start him in week 1, right? Like, there's no reason to try to bench Deshaun Jackson right now because this is the part of the year where he's healthy. You have to start him this week. And then Zach Ertz, obviously, in a smash play. And I would still be comfortable starting the Eagles defense, even though I'm expecting there to be a decent amount of points scored. I think they could probably get quite a few sacks and, a few interceptions from Dwayne Haskins. Now, with Boston Scott and Dallas Goedert, both of these guys are interesting DFS plays, guys that I would consider starting in like a really deep league. But probably not someone I'm going to try to force or shove into my lineup unless we get like confirmation that Sanders isn't going to play a lot. Then Boston Scott becomes a better play, or if Zach Ertz decides he's going to sit out because of his contract situation. Both of these guys I'm going to try to avoid because I believe in Sanders. And with Goddard, still a little concerned about that hairline fracture in his thumb. That could end up impacting him early on. So probably going to try to avoid these guys if I can, but they're not the worst starts. And then Greg Ward and JJ Arcega-Whiteside. And then I guess I should throw Jalen Reagor as a question mark in this game because he did practice fully today. So I guess there's the chance that he might play, but I think they'll probably end up sitting him out just to try to prevent any potential injury there or worsening of that shoulder injury. But I'm probably pretty much only going to play the tight ends and Deshaun Jackson in this one. I'm going to keep my hands off of Greg Ward and JJ Arcega-Whiteside until we see how this offense kind of balances itself out. All right, jumping over to Washington, I am definitely comfortable starting Antonio Gibson this week. It's not like you have to force him into your lineup over someone that you drafted like ahead of him, but you probably drafted him, especially if you did this last week, you probably had to spend like between a 5th and a 7th round pick on him. You're most likely expecting to start him. So you can check my rankings out on Fantasy Addiction Network and see who I have him ranked around if you're looking for, a specific start set advice, or you can comment and I'll get back to you when I have a second. But Antonio Gibson, I think, is going to have a pretty good week. Even though the Eagles are pretty good against the run, Antonio Gibson is going to get a lot of work in the passing game, which is pretty much what we've been expecting from him anyway. And I think in PPR especially, he's still going to have a pretty good week, even if he doesn't get a lot of carries. And obviously Terry McLaurin, he torched the Eagles last year, had multiple 100-yard games against the Eagles both times they played. So Terry McLaurin is an auto start. Now, Steven Sims is another interesting name. I'm probably not going to play him if I can avoid it, but he could actually have a pretty good game in this one. He had a decent game against the Eagles last year towards the end of the season, and there really aren't that many other pass catchers for this team. So he's the kind of guy that I want to keep on my bench if I can and wait and see how they use him in week 1, because he could end up being someone that you pick up off waivers, but if you can pick him up now for free, just hang on to him and then you save yourself some waiver hassle in week 2. I'm going to bench everyone else, though. J.D. McKissick, Bryce Love, I don't know what kind of usage they're going to give those guys, and they don't give you the same upside that Gibson gives you in the passing game. Logan Thomas is getting a lot of interest, but the Eagles were great against stopping the tight end last year. There's no way I'm starting Washington's defense this one because I think the Eagles are going to put up a lot of points. So overall, I like the Eagles in this one by 10. Give me the Eagles 31 to Washington at 21. All right, let's take a look at your questions. Yeah, I'm off Monty this week. Played David Johnson as number 2. Good job. Now go sell high, I would say, because that Texans team looks like they're going to be kind of trash, but take that with a grain of salt. I'll get to my trade talk videos next week. And then I went Michael Thomas, Drake, AJ Brown, Juju, and Dak, my first 5. Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully Montgomery ends up, being able to kind of get back to his old workload. We'll see if the Bears end up being any better this year. But overall, David Johnson looked really good tonight. So he's not a must sell by any means, but you might end up, especially let's see how this week plays out. We'll see what running backs end up underperforming. There might be some guys that you might be able to acquire and be able to use a soon-to-be age 29 David Johnson, who had a few plays where he was on the sideline already being looked at. So someone that hasn't finished the season since 2016. I'm happy if you drafted him because that means you can potentially sell him for way more than you paid for him, but we'll get to that next week. All right, let's look at the Browns versus the Ravens. Now, this was a pretty interesting battle last year. Browns actually won the first game, and then the Ravens took the second one, but they were pretty competitive. So don't look at this game as one that the Ravens are just going to bowl over the Browns. I think this will be pretty competitive overall. There's a 48.5 over-under, so decently high projected points. The Ravens are projected to win by 8, 28 to 20 implied points there. Now, last year, the Browns were pretty bad against the run and against tight ends, but pretty good at stopping opposing receivers. And the Ravens were just boss all around, except for they did give up some points to fantasy receivers, but really good against stopping the run, tight ends, and quarterbacks. But that didn't really seem to apply too much when they played the Browns. Nick Chubb had that boss game against them. Kareem Hunt had another good game towards the end of the season. Jarvis Landry went off against them both times, even though Odell Beckham didn't have a great game. So, I mean, like I said, this was a pretty competitive battle between these division rivals. And sometimes you have to throw out stats like fantasy points against stats when you're talking about division games, because these guys play each other differently when they're playing within the division versus outside. So anytime we have a division game, it's like throwing another wrench into it. It can go pretty much any way. So what do we expect to happen this week? Looking at the Browns, I'm comfortable starting Nick Chubb. I know there's a lot of concern for those of you that drafted Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt goes out and gets a bag, and now people are worried, like, oh crap, is Kareem Hunt going to be the guy? Is he going to end up getting more carries than Nick Chubb? I don't think so at all. When you look at this roster, outside of Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, they really don't have a solid wide receiver 3. We know that Kareem Hunt was playing in the slot a lot in training camp, and they kind of want to use him in that regard. Chubb is still a very dominant runner. He was Pro Football Focus's #1 runner on the year last year. So don't sleep on Nick Chubb just because Kareem Hunt is there. These guys could both be very valuable for fantasy this year. And this is what we've been preaching since May. I like both Chubb and Hunt. Hunt was a better value because you could get him a few rounds later, but I still think that Nick Chubb has every shot possible to beat out Derrick Henry for the #1 runner on the year. They went out and acquired Jack Conklin. They drafted Andrew Thomas in the first round. So this offensive line is going to be great. They bring in Kevin Stefanski, who instituted that zone run scheme that gave Dalvin Cook such a fantastic season last year. So even if Kareem Hunt is involved more so than like Alexander Madison was, Dalvin Cook was able to get the fantasy points that he did last year, finished #3 at the position with only 60% of the touches. So if it's a 60-40 split between Chubb and Hunt, both of these guys are going to be valuable. I like both of them. I like starting both of them this week. Obviously, I would start Chubb over Hunt, but try to get both of them in your lineup. I think they'll end up both having a good game. I like Odell Beckham, even though he didn't perform well against the Ravens last year. I like him to bounce back this year, and I think he does it starting week 1. Last year, he played the entire season hurt with a hernia, and I want to see what he looks like healthy with Baker Mayfield under a system where Baker isn't constantly getting murdered because his offensive line is terrible. I think Odell Beckham eats in this one, and I am comfortable starting him. Now, Jarvis Landry is someone who probably should be started. I'm just a little bit hesitant. I know he came off the PUP list. They're saying he looks good. I'm still just a little concerned that he's not fully back from that hip issue that could have potentially put him on PUP to start the year. I'm always a little bit hesitant to start players coming off of an injury in week 1. So if you can find a better option, I would probably try to avoid starting Landry this week. But if you have to do it, I don't hate you for it. I think I still have him ranked in my wide receiver 3 range. And then Austin Hooper, I just don't know exactly how they're going to deploy him in a game against the Ravens, who have a pretty solid linebacker core. Be a little bit hesitant to start Hooper this week. Let's see what kind of usage that they want to give him before we throw him in our lineups. And then, even though I'm expecting Mayfield to have a decent game, there's better options out there for quarterbacks. And unless you're in a 2-quarterback league, I'm not starting Baker Mayfield. I'm definitely not starting the Browns defense against Lamar Jackson. All right, now looking at the Ravens, you don't need me to tell you to start Lamar Jackson. If you do, then I don't know what to tell you. Now, Mark Ingram is a solid start in this one, even with J.K. Dobbins potentially getting a decent workload. I want to see how that split looks, but overall, I'm going to trust that they continue to give the ball to their lead guy last year. Mark Ingram was super efficient in this offense, and it makes sense. Like that zone read scheme that they run with Lamar Jackson is great for running backs. It's very hard for defenses to be able to zone in on the running backs when they know that Lamar Jackson is a constant threat of being able to take the ball himself. And that's what really helps running backs in these kinds of systems. Now, I do think J.K. Dobbins will eventually be that guy. But right now, week 1, we're going to trust our studs. You drafted Mark Ingram to start him. You're going to play him. Marquise Brown last year in week 1 barely had any targets, but still blew up for over 25 fantasy points. Now, it was against the Dolphins. The Browns are a little bit tougher in the secondary, but I'm still starting Marquise Brown. All reports across camp have been glowing. He put on tons of muscle. He came in at like 168 pounds last year, so getting closer to his actual playing weight. He's going to be a beast this year if he can stay healthy, and right now he's healthy, so pretty much a similar situation with all those other speedster guys that had the potential to blow up. You're always going to play them when they're healthy, and Marquise Brown is no exception. Mark Andrews absolutely torched the Browns last year, so I am most certainly starting Mark Andrews, and then I'd still be comfortable starting the Ravens defense. I think they have a good enough shot at getting a couple turnovers in this one, even though I am expecting the Browns to at least be somewhat competitive. I have Dobbins in my second guess category. I do think that he's going to get a decent amount of work this week. I don't know what that means. It could be anywhere between 5 to 15 touches, and what he does with those 5 to 15 touches could be anywhere from like 3 fantasy points to like 18 fantasy points. So with that range of outcomes, with that potential for the low end of him not doing too much on the touches that he gets, I would like to wait it out. If at all possible, you likely drafted him like 6th, 7th, or maybe 8th round, depending on how high he went in your draft. Most likely you have someone else that you can start over him. Try to wait this one out. Dobbins will eventually get his run, and when he does, we'll know. But for now, let's just see. They've been blowing a lot of smoke at us in terms of how they're going to use these guys. We have no idea what their plan is. I'm just going to go into this with the intention of waiting it out until Dobbins shows us that he's ready to go. Similar situation to Miles Sanders last year. You didn't recommend starting Miles Sanders until a couple weeks into the season. We're going to do the same thing with J.K. Dobbins. Try to bench him if you can. And then while I do think Miles Boykin has a chance of breaking out this week and could have a decent game, I'm going to wait and see whether or not it's going to be him or someone like Devin Duvernay or Willie Snead that gets the most targets outside of Brown and Andrews. It's just a wait and see game for that. All right. In terms of my prediction, I got the Ravens winning this one. Of course, I do think the Browns keep it competitive, but in the end, I think the Ravens just continue to power through them, and the Browns can't keep up. So I got the Ravens covering their spread in this one, winning 34-23. All right, next game up, we're looking at the Colts versus the Jaguars. One of the more disgusting games on this week. Jaguars, who are clearly tanking in this season. I'm not expecting them to be highly competitive at all, versus the Colts, who are looking to be on the up and up. So obviously, big changes to the Colts this year. Finally get to see the debut of what it looks like with Phillip Rivers in this offense, and their new offensive weapons in Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman. There's a lot going on here with the Colts and the Jaguars. Obviously, trading away Leonard Fournette. Interesting situation there. Let's see how we think this one is going to play out. Now, Vegas has this game as a 45.5 over/under, with the Colts winning by 8. So that gives us an implied point total of about 27-19. Last year, the Colts were below average in all of the defensive categories, which, they add, some to their defensive line. Should be a little bit better on defense this year. And then the Jaguars basically losing every single piece possible, losing Jalen Ramsey last year, losing Jonathan Ngakoue. Like, they don't have any of the all-stars that they had in their magical 2017 run. So this is going to be a pretty crappy defense. And again, for a team that were expecting to tank, I don't think the Colts are going to have any problem maintaining their dominance in this game. The Colts, we saw their philosophy last year of the way that they want to win games. Last year when they beat the Chiefs early on in the season, that is Frank Reich's philosophy. He wants to control the game. He wants to win it through maintaining time of possession, grinding the clock down by keeping a dominant run game and keeping you on your toes with guys like T.Y. Hilton, potentially able to open things up at any point. That's the kind of a game that the Colts want to run. And I don't think that is going to be very difficult for them to assert in this game versus the Jaguars. So I am comfortable starting both Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor in this game. Marlon Mack is probably the safer play because he's going to start this game and Jonathan Taylor will take over and spell him at times. But Jonathan Taylor is a absolute lightning bolt in a bottle, and even given 5 touches in this game, could still make his fantasy debut worth noting because of his ability to create massive breakaway runs. I mean, you could break away kind of like Derrick Henry does every time he plays the Jaguars. We could see a very similar run from Jonathan Taylor. So if you have to choose between the two, it's a tough call. I'd probably go Marlon Mack just for the safety of knowing that he's going to get guaranteed touches as long as he doesn't get hurt. Jonathan Taylor, though, could explode, and you could very much regret having him on your bench. So find a way to get both of these guys in your lineup if you can. This honestly might be the last week that we even think about starting Mack. If Jonathan Taylor just absolutely takes over that job after week 1, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, in terms of the pass catchers for this team, of course, you're going to start T.Y. Hilton. You drafted him to start him, and I think that he can still have a pretty good game. I am a huge fan of Paris Campbell this year, but I'm concerned that this is going to be a very run-heavy game, and there's not going to be a lot of passing volume here. So while I do like Paris Campbell, I'm probably going to wait and see what he can do this week before we throw him out in our lineup. And same thing for Jack Doyle. I think this will be, again, a very low pass volume game, so I'm not going to start Rivers. I'm trying to avoid his pass-catching options. Absolutely love the Colts defense in this one. The Colts defense could be the number 1 defense on the week. So, we're going to play the defense, play the run game, and try to avoid everything else. Now on the Jaguars side, expecting the Colts defense to be as good as we're expecting them to be, and the fact that the Jaguars are just kind of a dumpster fire of a team, probably going to avoid Gardner Minshew in this one. I do think you can throw Chris Thompson out there in a decent start. Chris Thompson, another one of those guys, a bit older, someone that has produced a lot in PPR, especially early on in the year while healthy. I think there's going to be plenty of garbage time in this game, and Chris Thompson could end up getting like 5-6 receptions in the last couple drives of the game, just getting those constant checkdowns as they're going deep. And I think DJ Chark can still find a way to eke out a pretty good performance in this one. If you absolutely need a spot start, you can try Tyler Eifert. He's been getting a lot of praise in camp and could actually end up getting used a lot in this team. But overall, I'm trying to avoid Jaguars in this one outside of Thompson and Chark. I like Shenault a lot. I think that Shenault will probably be pretty involved in this team at some point in the season, but probably going to want to avoid trying to throw him out there in week 1 in a game that we think the Colts could very easily handle this one on the ground. James Robinson is interesting. Okay, so Raquel Armstead on the COVID list and Divine Ozigbo getting thrown to IR. They go and sign Daria Gumbawale, who I doubt will have a role early on in the season. James Robinson is going to be the leading running back on this team, but for a game that we're not expecting the Jaguars to have any semblance of control over, how much are they going to be running the ball? When they're passing the ball to the receiver or to the running back, it's going to be going to Chris Thompson. I think James Robinson's floor is very low and his ceiling is probably not that high either. So I'm comfortable keeping him on my bench and stashing him and see what he can do in week 1. If he surprises me, great. But I'm not going to throw him out there in my starting lineup week 1. And I don't think there's really going to be any point this year that you're going to be comfortable starting the Jags defense. So based on the way I've been talking, you can probably guess how I expect this one is going to go. Colts are going to dominate this one. I got them winning by 11. Colts 21, Jaguars 10 is my prediction for this game. All right, let's take a look. I feel like there's a lot of chat going on right now, so let's see. Yeah, they definitely need to unleash J.K. Dobbins. I think that he's going to be a massive game changer this year. I mean, he could end up being the league winner type running back. Oh, that's my dog. He could end up being that league winner running back towards the end of the year that Miles Sanders was last year, just absolutely smashing towards the end of the season. So if you have him, even if he starts out slow, just hang on. You know what his potential is, and just wait that one situation out. Yeah, you're right, Jake. The Jags didn't lose pieces. They went out of their way to make sure that they can tank. So, I mean, I feel bad for Gardner Minshew because I do think that Gardner Minshew is a decent quarterback, and I'd like to see him actually have a chance. But it seems like the writing is on the wall in Jacksonville. They want Trevor Lawrence. And that sucks for Gardner Minshew because they're like, okay, go out there and try to win and prove to us that you're the man for the job, but we're going to give you nothing. You're going to throw, we're not going to do anything to improve the offensive line. The defense is going to be absolute garbage. You got DJ Chark and we gave you Laviska Shenault. You can do something with that, but they're not going to be able to be competitive this year. So I think Gardner Minshew is getting the short stick there. So And I do think that Jack Doyle is a decent sleeper at tight end. Like he's better than a lot of other options out there because Phillip Rivers does love to target his tight end. So I'm not saying you have to bench him. I'm just concerned that this is going to be a game where Phillip Rivers throws like 25 passes. And you win with Jack Doyle in PPR when he's getting like 8 receptions. So if Phillip Rivers is throwing 20, 25 passes, how do you start dividing that up? You're like, all right, so T.Y. Hilton gets 6. So we got Nyheim Hines and Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor getting like 6 to 8 of those targets. You got Paris Campbell maybe getting 5 or 6, Michael Pittman maybe getting 4 or 5, Jack Doyle getting like 5 or 6. Like if he's only getting 5 or 6 targets, it's still going to be a low pass volume game. Only way I see Jack Doyle outperforming this week is if he either gets a touchdown, which is possible, or if the Jaguars can actually keep this game competitive. And I do think Pittman will be good at this some point in this year too. My concern with Pittman is when you look at his archetype, like the type of receiver that he is, he profiles much closer to like Mike Williams type versus like Paris Campbell and T.Y. Hilton are much more like Keenan Allen. So Michael Pittman is a big-bodied receiver, not someone that you actually would expect to be able to create crazy open space with route running, but is a good big-bodied guy to throw up. So he's the kind of guy that you might be able to see get like 10, 12 touchdowns in a year, but probably never going to be someone that you're seeing get like over 100 receptions. Whereas I think Paris Campbell could be like what we hoped Curtis Samuel was last year and just used all over the field. The guy is lightning quick, runs a 4.29, I believe, super fast guy, and we totally missed out on him last year with him dealing with a bunch of injuries. But Frank Reich really loves Paris Campbell. They had a very similar draft capital between Campbell and Pittman last year. So don't sleep on Paris Campbell, even with Michael Pittman going. Let's see. I have not talked about the Falcons and the Seahawks yet. Brian, thank you for the love. I appreciate it. Who would you start? Would you start Todd as your running back too? I think you can start Todd Gurley this week. If you drafted Todd Gurley, the best time to start him is obviously early on in the season when he's healthy. So I'm comfortable starting him this week, especially against Seattle, because I think that's going to be a high-score game. Not going to be looking... I mean, this is the point in the season where you don't get cute, right? And if you drafted a guy in the 3rd, 4th round, if you're already looking to bench him, then you need to trade him away. There's no reason to keep a guy on your team that you drafted that early that now you're nervous about starting, right? Unless it's a rookie that you're waiting for him to get decent touches. Like Todd Gurley is the guy there in Atlanta. Ito Smith, Brian Hill, like they're going to get some work, but Todd Gurley is clearly a better talent than them. The issue with Todd Gurley is obviously, is he going to be able to sustain the workload for a full season? Is that knee going to give out at some point? So the issue with Todd Gurley is he's probably going to start off really strong and slowly taper off as the year goes on. Same thing with David Johnson. Once these guys start showing their wear and tear and they start getting up there in age, it becomes very hard for them to maintain the same success and explosiveness from week 1 all the way to week 16. But we're talking about week 1 here. Todd Gurley should be the healthiest he's going to be all year, going against a defense that isn't really that good, losing Jadeveon Clowney. I think he's going to have a pretty good game. So I'm comfortable starting Todd Gurley this week. Let's see. Yeah, so Jake agrees. And yeah, we're on the same page. All right. Okay. Let's talk the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Carolina Panthers. This is going to be a fun game. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on this one. So Raiders did a ton to address their offense in the offseason. Add Brian Edwards, add Henry Ruggs. Go out of their way to make sure Jalen Richard comes back. Add Lynn Bowden, then trade him away. Interesting situation there. DeAndre Washington is gone. They do bring in... what's his face from the Broncos? Can't remember now. It doesn't matter because he's probably not going to get much use. So lots of new faces. Jason Witten in the tight end spot there. Lots of new faces in Vegas. And obviously Vegas, first time that they're actually going to be playing as the Vegas Raiders. And then look at the Panthers. Even bigger changes. Basically the entire offense and defense was completely revamped. Bring in Teddy Bridgewater. You bring in Robbie Anderson. Spend a ton of draft capital on defense with Luke Kuechly gone. Like this team is going to be starting like 4 to 6 rookies on defense. It's going to be a weird team to watch. I think the Panthers are going to be like that team that's always competitive and never can quite win games. But Matt Rule is a winning coach. And I think that of all the teams that went out and got a new coach this year, I like the signing of Matt Rule the most. He showed a lot of promise with the way that he rebuilt multiple organizations in college. And then the sneaky upside of getting Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator that helped craft Joe Burrow's record-setting season in college, give him the offensive coordinator job here in Carolina with crazy playmakers like Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore. This is going to be a really fun offense that people are sleeping on because they're scared that Teddy Bridgewater is boring. So I've said my piece here. Let's go. Let's talk about this game. So Vegas kind of feels the same way I do, given this game a 48-point over-under. This is going to be a decently high-scoring game and a game that you're going to want, especially in DFS. You're going to want a lot of ownership in this game on both sides of the ball. So right now, the Raiders are actually projected to win this game by 3. Implied point total 26-23, give or take. So last year, the Raiders were average against the run, average against the pass. You could score a lot of points as a quarterback overall. And then the Panthers were basically bottom of the barrel at defense across the board, with the exception of the tight end position. And their defense is arguably worse this year than it was last year. Lots of rookies here. There's going to be a lot of growing pain with the Panthers. So every year in fantasy, there's always multiple defenses that we want to exploit. Like when you see your fantasy players playing against this team, you get excited. And Panthers are going to be one of those teams this year. Probably the Panthers, maybe the Jets could be that team this year as well, even though the Jets were pretty decent on defense last year. But most certainly the Panthers and the Falcons, two teams in the NFC South. When you see your team playing against this, or when you see your fantasy players playing against this team, you get excited. And this is going to be a really, really good game for some of the Raiders players. But most certainly, and I'm saying this from a place of, I am not a massive Josh Jacobs fan this year, but week 1, oh my word, Josh Jacobs is going to absolutely kill the Panthers. Like, if he runs for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, I wouldn't be shocked. The Panthers are garbage against the run. Josh Jacobs is the absolute smash play this week. Start him in DFS, start him in every single lineup that you can, and then trade him away. Darren Waller is another guy I'm comfortable starting this week. Now, I'm comfortable starting Derek Carr, Henry Ruggs, or Bryan Edwards in deeper leagues. My concern with starting them in week 1 is we don't really know what that division is going to look like yet. Bryan Edwards has been running the X all training camp. He looks really good. I think he's going to get a lot of work right away, but Hunter Renfrow is still there, who I forgot to throw on this list, and I apologize. Same thing. I'm keeping him in the same category. Between those 3 guys, Ruggs could end up having a really massive play that wins you your week. He could also start out really slow. Bryan Edwards could end up getting like 10 catches this week. He could also only get 4. Hunter Renfrow could be the guy. I want to see it before I throw guys out into my lineup. DFS is a different story. If we're talking DFS, you can run Ruggs and Edwards lineups all day long, because one of these guys, Ruggs, Edwards, and Renfrow, one of these guys is going to be really good this week. I just don't know which one it is, just being honest with you. So for me, if I'm talking season long, I want Jacobs, I want Waller, and I want those other guys on my bench, because whoever blows up, whether it's Ruggs, Edwards, or Renfrow, they're going to be super valuable next week. I'm not starting the Raiders defense in this one. As I mentioned before, I think the Panthers offense is highly underrated. Now, looking at the Panthers, again, if you need me to tell you to start Christian McCaffrey, we have issues. DJ Moore, obviously in a smash spot this week. Raiders secondary is not very good. Now, same problem with the Panthers as we have with the Raiders. Curtis Samuel, not looking that great in camp, actually. Hasn't really been turning too many hits. And then Robbie Anderson, similar situation with Henry Ruggs. At any point, could have a really, really good game. So I'm comfortable starting Robbie Anderson in like a DFS situation, but I would prefer to wait it out in terms of trying to throw Robbie Anderson out there in a season-long league. But I do think that these guys could be decent starts, especially in DFS. If you're in a 2-quarterback league, Teddy Bridgewater is a really decent start, but there's just more options out there that I'm more confident in than throwing Teddy Bridgewater out in his debut with the Panthers. But I do think he'll still finish above where people are expecting him to go right now. Ian Thomas is a name that I am actively avoiding right now. Dealing with turf toe, that's not a good situation. So I would avoid Ian Thomas, and I think that just means there's going to be more targets for Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore because they run similar routes. And then there's no way I'm playing the Panthers defense probably at any point this year. So keep that, just don't. But overall, I actually expect the Panthers to win this one. I think that they can actually surprise and end up kicking a field goal towards the end of the game, taking the lead. I won't be surprised if the Raiders win this one. This is going to be a close game no matter what, but I think the Panthers can actually surprise, win one, and then they're probably not going to win another game for a good bit of time. All right, let's take a look at what you guys got going on over here. So just told you how I felt about Ruggs. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Jake. I don't mean to throw the Jets under the bus. I don't hate them as an organization. I think Sam Darnold is a really good quarterback, and he's basically getting the Josh Rosen treatment right now, just playing under an absolutely abysmal head coach. If the best thing the Jets can do right now is fire Adam Gase by week 4 and get someone else in there, and I think that offense can really start to shine. There's a lot of promise there. The offensive line is looking really good. Sam Darnold could, take another step forward if you could actually play with an offensive mind that knew what he was doing. So I think the best case scenario for you guys is Adam Gase is gone. Ruggs is faster than Tyreek. That is definitely something to note, but we'll see how seasoned of a route runner he is. Keep in mind even playing in Alabama, it took him a while before he ever even saw any decent bit of target share in that offense. And for the first year he was out there, he was basically being used like Mecole Hardman, where you'd see him 1 or 2 times a game and he'd get a big touchdown and then he would disappear. So that could happen again here with the Raiders. Robbie Anderson has stone hands and is basically best on a deep fly route, which isn't really Teddy's game. Now, I will say, yes, Teddy Bridgewater does not throw deep often, but it's not like he can't do it. Last year he was actually top 4, I think, in terms of deep ball accuracy. He didn't go downfield very often. He only averaged twice a game, but he was very accurate, much more accurate than Josh Allen, much more accurate than, or definitely more accurate than Sam Darnold deep down the field. So don't sleep on Robbie Anderson. He's probably not going to be consistent enough to ever really consider in season-long leagues, but with the right matchup, probably going to be a pretty decent DFS play. All right, take a quick sip of this. And also, just know I will throw any team under the bus when they start sucking. I'm a Packers fan, and I absolutely hate what they did this offseason. So you'll probably hear me yell at them just as much, if not more, than the Jets this year. So just recognize that. Anyway, let's look at the Bears versus the Lions. This is also another one of those sneaky games that could potentially have more fantasy value than most people are thinking. So Vegas has this game at a lower over-under 43.5, and giving us an implied point total of the Lions 23, Bears 20. They got the Lions winning this one at home. Now, the Bears were pretty good defensively against fantasy players last year, and we're expecting them to still be maybe not locked down like they were a couple years ago, but should still be in the upper echelon of defenses. But that doesn't really seem to apply when they play the Lions. Every time these guys play, it ends up turning into a pretty decently high-scoring game. Even the game last year where it was David Blau, they still gave up a decent amount of points to the Lions. So I don't know what it is about these two teams, but whenever they play, it doesn't really seem to matter what the defenses did. And then obviously the Lions defense was atrocious last year, probably not going to be that much better this year. So what does that mean in terms of starting players? Now, overall, I think you can start anyone that have in the second guess category. We'll break this down by team, but I just want to start out by saying that I'm not throwing shade on any of these guys. I'm just, whenever these two guys go, the Bears and Lions go head to head, weird things always happen. So first of all, of course you're going to start Allen Robinson. There's no reason to bench him. If you drafted him early, you're expecting to start him, just start him. Anthony Miller, I think, is also a fine play this week. We saw him really start to take over last year, and if David Montgomery ends up not getting as much work this week, recovering from that groin injury, they're not going to be able to run the ball efficiently. And even if he does get a lot of work, he could, be a little bit slower and just, trying to avoid re-injuring that groin. This could be a decent pass volume game for the Bears. I'm okay with starting the Bears defense. You probably drafted them expecting to start them. They're not like a must start by any means, but I do think that they have a good enough time in terms of forcing sacks, potentially getting a couple picks. I think they'll be, even if they give up a lot of points, they'll still score enough of those peripheral points that they'll be a good start this week. Now, Mitchell Trubisky is actually, over time, has been really good against the Lions. I believe he scored 3 touchdowns against them in the last 2 starts. And he could do it again because the Lions defense is not very good. I'm not rushing out there to start him, but if you need a spot start and you're just nervous about your current option, you could do worse. I'm just nervous still with the whole Nick Foles, Mitchell Trubisky situation. That could impact his play. He could be nervous about getting benched at any moment. You know how that whole, anytime the coach does not have full confidence in the quarterback, it usually leads to bad things, right? We've seen with Nick Foles, whenever Nick Foles is in a quarterback competition, he kind of sucks. The best time we see Nick Foles is when he has the guaranteed starting job and there's not a younger quarterback nipping at his heels. We'll see what Mitchell Trubisky looks like with competition. Maybe he's different. Maybe that'll actually fuel him. I just don't want to risk my first week in fantasy throwing Trubisky out there. Now, Tariq Cohen is interesting. He should end up getting a little bit more work this week with David Montgomery still recovering from that injury. So I'm probably more comfortable starting Tariq Cohen than I am David Montgomery in this game, especially since I'm expecting there to be a decent bit of passing. But if you can avoid both of them just to see how this situation actually plays out, does Cordero Patterson or Ryan Nail get any usage in this game? Probably try to avoid them if you can. And then I don't care that they say that Jimmy Graham is doing well in camp. I'm just not starting Jimmy Graham anymore. He was absolutely a ghost and a shell of himself on the Packers, and I can't imagine that he found the fountain of youth to be able to turn things around. He's going to have a couple games this year where he scores 2 touchdowns, and people are going to be like, oh my gosh, I should have started Jimmy. No. There's just no. Okay, let's jump over to the Lions. Now, caveat. Kenny Golladay did not practice today. It doesn't sound like there's any doubt that he's going to play. I think they're just giving him some rest. And as it stands right now, unless we get more news tomorrow, I'm still very confident in starting Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay absolutely torched the Bears last year. Marvin Jones is an absolute smash start pretty much every week until he gets hurt. But if Kenny Golladay doesn't practice tomorrow and there's any doubt of him playing, obviously that makes Jones a little bit better of a target, but definitely got to keep that on your radar. Again, if I had to, look into my crystal ball here and try to figure out what's going to happen on Sunday, I think both of these guys play. I think they both have a really good game. Comfortable starting both of them. And then TJ Hawkinson says he's 100% on that ankle. Has been absolutely killing it in camp. Could have his breakout week 1 against the Bears. Now, the Bears were decent against the tight ends last year, but again, things change. And TJ Hawkinson could be very involved here. I mean, we have a very similar situation on both sides of the ball. We're expecting this to be a game that's centered around the pass on both offenses because the run game for both teams is in a bad spot, right? So we got David Montgomery nursing a groin injury and Tariq Cohen, who really just didn't look good last year. He was a bit slower and didn't seem to have that quick burst that he had his first couple seasons. Whereas on the Lions side, you got Kerryon Johnson, who's living in a knee brace, already basically talking up both DeAndre Swift and Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson is like his idol, and DeAndre Swift, he literally said, I can't do the things that he does with his legs. Now, DeAndre Swift is nursing a lower leg injury. He's still limited in practice. This is going to be a messy situation on both sides of the ball. I'm trying to avoid this run game on both teams like the plague, which I think will lead to more passing overall, which is why I'm starting all the passing options in this game, with the exception of Danny Amendola, because at this point, I mean, if you have to start Danny Amendola, you're either in an 18-team league or you're just in a really bad spot. So, but overall, I think this would be a decent game. And while I think there's better options than Stafford, of course I'm comfortable starting Stafford in this one. I just think that there might be a better option on the waivers, or who you ended up drafting. But if you drafted Matt Stafford to be your starter, you can play him. I'm totally fine with that. Overall, though, I think the Lions win this one. I got the Lions winning this one 27-20. I think this will be a little bit higher scoring than Vegas is thinking. Let's see. Yeah, Jets upgraded the line. I blame the GM more. Do you blame the GM more than Adam Gase? Because I most certainly do not blame the GM more than Adam Gase. Everyone is more accurate than Josh Allen. That is a correct statement, with the exception of Kyle Allen. I don't think there's any relation there, but there's something about having the last name Allen in 2019 and not being able to throw the ball. Yeah, you already bet the over on the Lions. Like, I agree. I think that one will end up going over, and still believe Monty is a Kareem Hunt clone if they had an offense. Well, we'll see. There's a lot of teams that I'm expecting the coaches to be on the hot seat pretty early on, and Matt Nagy is definitely on that short list. So, okay, let's take a quick swig. Thank you guys for joining me, and this is really fun. Keep hitting me up with questions. Like I said, I'll hit on your questions between these discussions. Anyway, let's jump over to the Seahawks and the Falcons. This is one of the most exciting games this week. I'm really pumped for this one. I think this is going to be a pretty high-scoring game. We'll see if they let Russ cook. That's obviously going to be the biggest question heading into the year for the Seahawks is, will they just let Russell Wilson play like Patrick Mahomes? Will they just let him throw the ball like, 30 times a game? That would be amazing. Russell Wilson would be the number one fantasy quarterback overall. And then the Falcons, upgraded offense. Offensive line is healthy. They lost a lot of pieces last year on the offensive line. I think their offense is going to be great this year. Not expecting their defense to be that great. This should be one of the highest scoring games on the week. Over under right now, 48.5. I'm still going to take the over. Implied point total, Seahawks 25, Falcons 23. So they're expecting this to be a close game. I think this would be a back and forth barn burner between Matt Ryan and Russell Wilson. And, one of the things that we've seen, even the last time, the closest thing that we've had recently to the situation that we have right now with COVID was the lockout year in 2010, when there was a very truncated preseason. There was a lot less training camp because of the lockout. And in that season, offenses absolutely killed it. There was way more passing yardage. There were way more scoring plays in that season because defenses were just not in gear, especially early on in the year. So if there's going to be anything different this year, it's that there's going to be a lot of teams that just absolutely explode out the gate offensively. And between the Seahawks and the Falcons, I'm expecting there to be a lot of points scored. Neither of these teams were that great on defense last year, and I'm not expecting them to be much better this year. Yes, they add some help in the safety department for the Seahawks, but losing Jadeveon Clowney is going to end up hurting them on the defensive line. This should be a really high scoring game. So you probably can already guess we're going to throw as many options in this game as possible. So I talked about the Panthers and the Raiders as being a DFS target game. This is another one that we're going to target a lot of guys in this game. Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, start them both. Chris Carson, Todd Gurley, you drafted them early. You're starting them both in this game, like both Julio Ridley, Tyler Lockett, and Metcalf. And then really love Hayden Hurst in this game. Again, the Seahawks were absolutely garbage against the tight ends last year, and I think Hurst can come out and have a really good game in this one. Greg Olsen, I'm going to pause and see, is Will Disley healthy? Are they going to use Hollister? Is Olsen actually going to be the third target on this team? We don't know. Try to avoid Olsen if you can. That would be the only main pass catching option here that I'm avoiding. But starting everyone else, Josh Gordon and Russell Gage, I think you could do that in like a really, really deep league, or if you just want like an absolute flyer for a GPP, you could potentially start Gage, but I don't think either of these guys are going to see a good bit of targets unless Lockett, Metcalf, or Julio Ridley go down. So I'm not going to start them, and I'm definitely avoiding both defenses in this one because this one could be an absolute barn burner. Right now, our projection, I think the Seahawks take this one 34-28, but it should be a close game, and honestly, this one could even go higher in the point category overall. This one is easy. If you have Seahawks, you have Falcons, you're starting them. So you got 14 people watching. It was 3 when I got here. Please ask some questions. That's not talking myself. Yes, thank you, Jake. I would appreciate that. Ask as many questions as you want. If you come back and watch this stream after the fact, leave a comment. My goal here is to answer every single question that's being asked this year because that's why I'm here, is to help you guys come to those tough decisions and hopefully get you as many wins and victories leading up to a fantasy championship as possible. Absolutely love talking football, so hit me up with any questions for sure. Yes, and Greg Olsen is definitely very injury prone. He's much older at this point too. He's already kind of looking forward to his career post the NFL, going to be a broadcaster. I believe he has a contract with ESPN already. He did a few games back for the XFL. So we'll see. I don't know. The tight end position in Seattle, Russell Wilson has found a way to get those guys a lot of fantasy points. We saw Will Disley was killing it last year before he got hurt. Jacob Hollister had a few good games as well. So wouldn't surprise me if Greg Olsen gives us one last hurrah and has a good season, but I'm going to wait it out and see how that situation goes. Okay. One more. Kevin, just saw your question, Stafford or Ryan. I would go Matt Ryan. Don't hate Stafford and definitely comfortable starting him, but Matt Ryan is in such a smash spot this week. I would definitely start Ryan. Okay, I believe this is the last early game. Another one of the interesting storylines. So we've got the Dolphins playing the Patriots. Dolphins completely revamped their team with, felt like 150 draft picks after trading everyone away last year. And it seems like they're going to be still not that competitive this year, but I think they're on the up and up. So Ryan Fitzpatrick getting the start in this game. Devontae Parker finally breaking out after so many years of, just constantly missing expectation. Preston Williams coming off of his ACL tear. What's he going to do? Mike Gesicki started to break out at the end of last year. What's he going to do? Who's going to be the running back between Jordan Howard and Matt Breida? Lots of questions to be answered there in Miami. Same number of questions to be answered there in New England with Tom Brady leaving. So Cam Newton comes in. Cam Newton has gotten, I always say this, Bill Belichick reserves praise. He does not say many nice things about anyone. And the way that Bill Belichick has been talking up Cam Newton, either he is trying some weird scheme where he's just trying to motivate and encourage his team, and that's a bad sign, or Cam Newton is literally going to destroy the league this year. It's one or the other with Bill Belichick, right? But when Bill Belichick talks, I listen. And the fact that he's actually going out of his way to talk up Cam Newton is something to pay attention to, because he just doesn't do that. So this is going to be a very, very telling game right away. I don't think the Dolphins are that strong of a defense. So if the Patriots are going to be a good team this year, this is going to be a smash game for the Patriots. Right now, the over-under is low, 42, and the Patriots are slated to win by 6.5. So 18-24, Patriots winning that one is the implied point total. Last year, the Dolphins were abysmal against the wide receivers, not great against stopping the run or the quarterbacks, pretty decent at stopping tight ends. And last year, the Patriots defense they were the team, them and the Steelers were the team that you wanted to avoid playing starters against. And a lot of opt-outs this season. Stephon Gilmore is still there, but they did lose a lot of key pieces here. It's going to be really interesting to see if Bill Belichick is able to cobble together the players that he has left and still put together a dominant defense. I'm not expecting them to be nearly as good as they were last year, but they'll still probably be above average, because that's just what Bill Belichick seems to do, is take guys that you've never heard of and still find a way to make them amazing. So overall, I think the Patriots defense will be decent here, and I'm expecting Cam Newton to really give this team new life. So in terms of who we're starting in this game, I'm comfortable starting Devontae Parker. You drafted him to be a starter. Same thing. I'm not going to try to talk you out of taking guys that you drafted in the first 6 rounds and benching them. Unless we find out that he re-injured himself. He's been practicing this week. Looks like he's going to go. And then Mike Gesicki had a really good game last year against the Patriots, and he was doing really good towards the end of the year. I think this team is going to have to throw the ball a lot. There's going to be a lot of garbage time at the end of this game, the way that I'm predicting it. So I think Parker and Gesicki they're not the highest upside plays by any means, but I do think they give you a pretty safe floor and should be decent starts. In terms of the run game here, I think the plan is to give Howard the majority of carries and giving Breida more like the third down role and keeping, spelling Howard on a few drives. But Breida's never been able to stay healthy his entire career. Jordan Howard is basically what Carlos Hyde is at this point, where he always does good enough to keep the coach excited and happy with what he's doing, but it's not really much you're going to see for fantasy. And then Preston Williams, I really like Preston Williams. I think he's incredibly talented. I think he's going to have a really good year. My problem is I want to make sure he's able to play a full game coming off of that ACL injury. He's, ahead of the timeline here. And it was a similar thing that we were looking at with Cooper Kupp last year. It was like, okay, I just want to make sure he's healthy before I'm throwing him in my lineup. I think Preston Williams will have a good year. Definitely want him on my team, but probably going to try to avoid playing him against the Patriots in week 1, who still have a pretty good secondary. So Parker and Gesicki, the only guys I'm comfortable starting this week, and there's probably even better options over Gesicki. I'm just throwing him out there because I still really believe that the breakout is coming for him this year. You probably don't need, hopefully you don't need to start Ryan Fitzpatrick, and hopefully you don't need to start the Dolphins defense. I would keep them on your bench. Now, jumping over to the Patriots. If you drafted Cam Newton, you probably drafted him to start, and I'm most certainly starting him against the Dolphins. Last year, the Patriots absolutely destroyed the Dolphins early on, and I think that Cam Newton could come out and completely dominate on the ground and in the air. Cam Newton is a great start this week. Could be, he's a candidate to be the quarterback that is on a lot of the Millie Maker lineups in DFS this week. I think James White is one of my favorite starts this week. When you look at the pass catchers in this offense, he's probably going to be the second most targeted guy, if not the most targeted, if Edelman's injury that popped up, I think it was a knee injury, popped up on the injury report this week. This could be a fantastic week for James White, and I'm going to be starting James White as much as possible in PPR formats, and I think you can still throw Edelman out there. He's going to be the number 1 target again. He was a wide receiver 1 last year, even though he played through injuries, and Cam Newton has to throw the ball to somebody. Maybe N'Keal Harry ends up being that guy. If you have to throw N'Keal Harry out there in a deeper league, I don't hate it, but I'd much rather see what this offense looks like. I want to start the people that I know are going to be involved, Cam, White, and Edelman. I want to play the waiting game on everyone else. Michelle could have a decent game, but they could end up using Rex Burkhead a bit. JJ Taylor there, they could end up using him a lot. You know Belichick's schemes. James White is going to get a lot of work in the passing game, and that's more consistent to me. I'd rather not run the risk with Michelle, although if you have Michelle and you need to start him, he's not the worst play this week. I think he ends up being okay. He looked so toast last year, and with already dealing with foot injury in the offseason, it's surprising that he was able to return, not even coming into PUP. We haven't really heard anything positive about him in training camp, so I would avoid him if you can, but I understand the urge to start him against Dolphins, which is a good matchup to start Michelle. I just avoid it. And then same thing with N'Keal Harry, up and down training camp. Maybe he ends up being the Kelvin Benjamin to Cam Newton, and he gets a lot of touchdowns this year. Great. If you have him on your bench and he blows up week 1, you won. That's great. That's fantastic. You can either trade him or you have a great asset for the rest of the year. But he has just as good of an opportunity of putting up 2 receptions for 10 yards in this game, and then you're disappointed. So I'm not going out of my way to start N'Keal Harry. And Patriots defense, I think, is still one of the better options this week. And obviously, we're not going to start any tight ends for the Patriots unless someone just breaks out all over the place. We're going to be avoiding that spot all year long. And then finally, our prediction for this one, I got the Patriots blowing the Dolphins out 24-10, but that could be even higher. So that is it in terms of our early game predictions. Again, we will be talking the late games tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that stream. I'll go back through and chop these up if you're looking for individual games, but let me reach back out to your guys' questions here. So, yes, so crazy value for a low perceived price on Jamison Crowder. I like Jamison Crowder a lot this week. Again, 17 targets last year against the Bills in week 1. I think he's going to have a pretty good week. When do I predict Jonathan Taylor to break out? I predict week 1. Playing against the Jaguars, I think he's going to have a pretty nice second half. I don't think they're going to use Marlon Mack the whole game. I think he's going to get a decent amount of looks. If I had to predict, he'll probably get about 10 carries, and I think he could break a few long runs. Now, as to when he actually takes over that backfield, I'm still saying end of September. So we'll see how Frank Reich wants to play this out. But overall, I think Jonathan Taylor is going to make it to where he can't not have him on the field most of the game. So let's see. He would have been around. Let's see. Yeah, very comfortable with Crowder, especially in full PPR. Starting Herndon, this Jets tight end, talked out of it. Yeah, I don't hate Chris Herndon this week. There could be a lot of garbage time for Chris Herndon, and if you need a really cheap play in DFS, or you just don't have, you're just throwing darts at the wall at tight end, I think Herndon could still have a pretty decent performance in garbage time. But the Bills were really good against stopping the tight ends last year, have a very strong linebacker core there. So there's no guarantee he's gonna do anything. And Hayden Hurst, I think, is gonna smash this week. Higbee or Gesicki. Okay, well, I'm gonna get to the Rams tomorrow. against the Cowboys. But Higbee absolutely destroyed the Cowboys last year, and he's been looking phenomenal in camp. So I'm definitely starting Higbee over Gesicki, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Let's see. The Dolphins did beat the Patriots, but I've been a Dolphins. I grew up liking the Dolphins, and I switched allegiance to the Packers about 10 years ago. But the Dolphins always play the Patriots better in December. I don't know why. Like that first game against the Patriots, they normally get blown out, and then they beat them, or at least are competitive towards the end of the year. Like the Miami Miracle happened later in the season. So while the Dolphins could be competitive, I don't expect that to happen in week 1. But you never know. It's true. You never do know with Ryan Fitzpatrick. He can just show up whenever he feels like it. I think Minshew would do the same and mess up the Jags tank. Maybe Minshew is better, and if he does mess up their tank, then that should be a good thing, right? Like they should be like, oh snap, we actually have our quarterback. We don't need to tank and go after Trevor Lawrence. But overall, I don't think that he'll be able to do enough to keep this team from being like 3-13. Start Jonathan Taylor or Marquise Brown. Give me Marquise Brown. I think he blows up in week 1. While I like Jonathan Taylor a lot, Marquise Brown has a more assured workload there, and he's been looking really good in camp. Gained a good bit of muscle mass there, which is what you want to see with receivers. I think he could have a massive breakout year. And I think that's about it, guys. So thank you again for joining me. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the conversation and the questions. It's been incredibly fun. Hope you guys join me tomorrow. If you watch this stream after the fact, leave a comment. I'll be sure to reach back out to you there. And let's see. Yeah, I think that's about it. So thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a good night.